Winds of change, they are blowing in the Windy City. This week, Democratic delegates from across the country are coalescing behind Vice President Harris, who is expected to formally accept her party's nomination for President of the United States. Well, let me just tell you this. If she doesn't, that's going to be huge news. So that is actually happening. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call my smart friends and find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. We are here at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois, kicking off the 2024 Democratic National Convention. And joining us on the podcast today is my good friend, Michael Meehan. He is the CEO and president of Squared Communications. He is making a return appearance. It's my very good friend, a Democrat who worked on the John Kerry campaign. He's done amazing things. He has so many accolades and accomplishments and achievements. I don't even know where to start. And he's here with me to talk about what's happening here. And he's one of the most fair, thoughtful analysts out there. So we are lucky to have you. But we were just talking, and I think it was kind of interesting. The last time you were on, I got a lot of feedback about how people liked learning about how I knew my friends that I'm calling up. And so we talked about how you and I served on the Voice of America board together. Well, Broadcasting Board of Governors, but most people know that as part of the overall VOA entities. And Michael and I actually traveled to South Sudan the week before it became a country.
Right.
And as we sat down here, we're in Chicago. We have beautiful weather. We're in this amazing place. There's a lot of people in a good mood. Some people maybe not in that great of a mood if they're Republicans, thinking, wait, what's just happened to us? But before we get started, just reflect on that time that we went to Sudan, and there was hope for that country. Now it seems like it might even be worse there.
Yeah, I know. The news has just been crushing for me to hear about that, particularly when we really thought that they had a very good chance, to find some peace and democracy, in the region. I mean, it's been so tribally war torn for so long, but they were really amazing people. We had a chance to visit with a bunch of folks while we were there, but people that work for the Voice of America, but the people who are like very excited about this.
Remember, we went to the orphanage and then we went and bought them bikes and we took them back this next day.
We did.
I thought Michael was going to come home with a child.
Yes, it's totally true. That boy was left there 5 minutes before we walked in. I literally called my wife. I said, well, I've got 3 girls. Do you want a boy? And she was like, oh.
Yes,
she's like,
no.
ooh, but no.
And also, of course, that would be illegal to not do it through proper channels. So that didn't happen. But it is interesting that, anywhere you are in the world, there is something going on. And if Vice President Harris becomes the president, the commander in chief, she knows that all of those problems also come to her desk as well.
No, it's a heavy responsibility, but I think that one of the things that President Biden's really good at, as you saw with getting the hostages released. I mean, that's a complicated deal with 8 or 9 different countries, right? And if he and Tony Blinken can help figure out how to solve, get some peace in Gaza,
and as well as our hostages that are being held in there as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about politics. This is the first convention you haven't had a role in?
It's like a job, yeah. Since like 1988.
That was 1988. Let's see, who was running for president then?
Mike
yes,
Dukakis was running for president.
Dukakis.
Yes.
But did you get involved with Dukakis because of your Massachusetts connections?
Yes, I did. I worked at the convention in Atlanta, and he was the nominee, governor of my home state, and a bunch of my guys who I was with last night. We all had this reunion event here in Chicago. I was remembering back in the days when you had convention bounces.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Dukakis finished that convention. He was up 17 points.
17?
17 points at the end of that convention.
And who went first, Republicans or Democrats?
Republicans went first. And so he was like on a rocket ship and went on to lose 40 states.
Wow. Okay, so that's interesting for everybody to think about now, because in the last 29 days since we were in Milwaukee, the former president was nearly assassinated.
Yep.
The Republicans had a convention that was incredible for them.
Yep.
Right? I mean, they were happy people. They were excited, and they just could feel it. They could taste victory. Joe Biden was definitely going to lose.
Yep.
And 4 days later, Joe Biden drops out of the race. Is pushed out of the race, if you read Maureen Dowd. A coup is a coup, she said.
Well.
And the race has changed completely.
Yeah.
Now, at first, Republicans and some in the media were saying, wait, you can't just swap people out. You had a process, and all of these millions of voters voted for Joe Biden, and nobody voted for Kamala Harris to be the nominee. And it just sort of happened. And when I saw Republicans saying, "You're disenfranchising the Democratic voters," I thought, but if they don't feel disenfranchised, if they don't care, if they're happy with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, and now we see a poll, I think it was ABC, that 93% of Democrats are happy with this change. You can't tell people they feel disenfranchised if they don't feel that way.
Right. Well, plus, parties get to pick their nominee. Like people in Iowa go to a caucus, right? They stand in a gym and then they vote. People in New Hampshire go to a ballot box and they're still voting for someone to be their Democratic nominee. We have just different rules in different states. Yeah. Republicans have a lot of them have winner take all states when they win their primary or caucus, and Democrats have a lot of proportional representation. I get 30% of the vote. I get 30% of the delegates. I get 20% of the vote. I get 20%. So the rules of the delegates here are only obligated to vote for the nominee on the first ballot, and after that, if it was a second ballot, they're free to vote for you or me. Yeah. Like there's no, I mean, it's one of the great things that I like about our political system is, the parties have the rules to pick who they want to put on the ballot.
What did you think about the pick of Tim Walz as her vice presidential selection, the governor of Minnesota?
Truthfully, I knew not very much about the man before he sort of burst on the scene, but I mean, it's been a long time since we've had a really relatable vice presidential nominee. I mean, he's a coach and he's a school teacher and, he's a governor. He's very approachable. He has a strong set of value systems but he explains it in ways that most progressives do not explain. They don't take on the head of the issue. So I thought it was an inspired pick. She clearly has gotten energy off of it. I mean, the two of them together have been.
She can't take a bad picture.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
But here's the other thing: is that Michael has worked in media relations as well. Have you ever seen such puffery for 4 weeks?
Well, she has been benefiting by the calendar, right? You've had the 4 weeks of the 4 days of the Republican convention. Naturally, that's going to steal the show. I would argue that if Trump stopped talking after 20 minutes of his speech, he'd be in much better shape. But he just can't help himself. And then he's been doing the same for the last 3 weeks since then. But yes, she's been on quite the roll. But the process has sort of allowed her to dominate. She's going to have an amazing week this week, and then we'll people will sort of. My kids are back to school today, so when people sort of get back into the fall and take a peek, and then you're going to have the debate to look at.
Yeah. Dan Balls said the race is tied. The race is tied. The race is tied. Dan Balls is of the Washington Post. He pays a lot of attention to these things, and so. I mean, some people, we talked to a couple of Democrats yesterday who felt like, absolutely, she's obviously going to win. I have Republican friends who are like, clearly, Trump's obviously going to win.
Yeah.
Although there's fewer of them at the moment. There's nervousness on the Republican side. And I'm going to talk about that in segment 2 with you, more of the horse race. I want to spend just the next couple of minutes asking you about Joe Biden, because I know that you worked on the Senate side for many years when he was a senator. Yeah. You've watched him run for president several times, and then he won in 2020. And then to have a pretty difficult ending, and he's going to speak at the first night of the Democratic convention. He's basically going to say goodbye. What I think is unbelievable is he's not speaking till 9:50 p.m. Central Time. I mean, is a speech, it better be 10 minutes.
Well, I don't know. I didn't write the speech, but that's when all of the. I mean, we run the same play, right? So the broadcast networks only cut live at 10 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock. So it would be a slight to him if he spoke at 7 when you didn't have all the broadcast TVs, cutting away to it. So I mean, that's kind of how we run conventions. Is a giant TV set, and you play to the audience, and so you give him the prime slot on a Monday night. So
what about his mood? We have read that he's unhappy, he's mad, he's kind of frustrated with people he thought were his longtime friends, and yet he realized maybe he just saw the writing on the wall where Nancy Pelosi was like, you are going to have to go.
Yeah. Look, I think, his generation of politicians, I haven't seen any graceful exits, or not that many. People have a hard time saying that they want to retire. I mean, I'm getting of a certain age where some of my friends are retired and some of my friends still have kids in high school.
It's interesting, yeah, because you say that President Bush and President Obama, I think, are two good examples of people who moved on.
Right. But the American people voted for them twice, and they got to
Okay.
they got to choose their
Good point.
exit ramp. They didn't take themselves
I
off
see
the
you.
stage.
I see. Good
The
point.
Constitution said they couldn't keep that job any longer. That's no, and
No,
they were
and
both young men and
I
accomplished,
I
right?
remember right before January 20th, 2009, when we were turning things over to Obama. I remember at one point saying to President Bush, "Oh, I'm going to miss you so much. It's going to be so sad. And what about all my friends? And what are we going to do?" And he said, "Well, you better get over it because we have to leave
Yeah,
at noon.
yeah.
You can't stay. They are going to turn out the lights
So
on
that's
you."
at noon, right. Yeah, and it goes back to George Washington. He's like, "Yep, two's enough," and I agree. It's you got to give it's fresh ideas.
Yeah, so for Biden, it's also a little bit bittersweet as well. And
Yeah.
he's dealing with age.
Right, and he's still on the job, right? His day job's pretty important. There's a lot going on around the world to keep America safe. So and it takes a lot of energy, and I think this process sort of forces people's hands about this stamina and whatnot.
I get the sense that the word has gone out to everybody that's going to be in the hall tonight that everyone is going to be nice to Joe Biden.
Oh yeah,
everyone's going to clap, and you might even see some tears.
Well, but I actually think it's all genuine too. I mean, look, I think there was the frustration that you heard and felt about whether he could, he may still have won the election. The question was he fit enough to serve for another 4 years? And
but the thing that kind of kills me about that, Michael, is that obviously not. And somebody like Annie Linsky, she's a Wall Street Journal reporter who we just had on, and she had a story in early June that had 25 sources, and the White House came down on her like a ton of bricks. Andrew Bates at the White House is a very fierce, loyal defender of Joe Biden, said, "How dare you write the story that 25 sources saying that President Biden is showing real signs of mental decline, cognitive decline." And then 3 weeks later, he's no longer the nominee. And why? Well, I guess because what? Because he wasn't good enough? Because he didn't have... And I think that they were all hiding that in plain sight. Kamala Harris, too. There's a poll last week that said 67% of Americans, it's an ABC poll, think that she knew about his cognitive decline, and nobody did anything about it. But they still said you should vote for him for another 4 years.
Yeah, well, it's sort of the nature of the business. Like, it's really hard for someone to go to their boss and say, "Hey, I think it's time for you to step down because I'd really like your job," and then be treated as credibly. I mean, I have an 80-year-old mom. There are mornings when I call her, and she is sharp as a tack, and there are mornings that I call her, and it's like, that's not so great. And she shouldn't be in charge.
But she's not the president of the United States.
She shouldn't be in charge of anything either.
Right.
But
I think that the White House I think Biden was hurt very much by his own staff telling Axios that he was only, quote, dependably engaged, unquote, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. I thought, who is saying that inside the House?
Well, I mean, even more so that he gets credit for making the decision to take himself off the stage. He's the only person who could have taken himself off the stage. I mean, I guess the 4,000 people that are coming to this hall could have had a vote and then done.
But they all seem relieved and they seem happy.
Yeah, they do. And look, I mean, she's been out in the vine. She's been a prosecutor. She's been elected to the biggest state in the country, the fourth biggest nation, if it were a nation of its own, several times between senator and attorney general. She's a well qualified candidate, and she's been sitting there dutifully in the number 2 slot.
And I understand.
Democrats hardly ever give the number 2 person the chance. Republicans were always great at the runner-up of the previous election would become the nominee, which has been up until Trump. That had been the case for most of our lives. So this is one of the first times
was
that
that
the
a
Democrats
mistake
did.
in 2000 to run Gore?
Well, you could argue that if he won his home state, then they would have won, right? I mean, we picked John Edwards in 2004, and he didn't win North Carolina. Because I was always just thinking through about how this VP pick goes. He didn't get picked because we have to win Minnesota, but we have to win Minnesota whether he's on the ticket or not. But sometimes it's a generational thing. Other than Lyndon Johnson stealing Texas for John Kennedy back in 1960, a VP pick hasn't had that much muscle.
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on, but we'll take a quick break. And we are back with Perino on politics. Michael, I know Republicans and some in the media have been complaining that Kamala Harris hasn't done a lot of interviews. Oh, wait, actually, let me correct myself. 0 interviews. But I get it. I understand why. I mean, because if you look at her media coverage, it's so glowing. It's like, oh, come on, you guys, you're like making yourselves blush over here. But that I always felt like Kamala Harris in her campaign, she starts off really strong, and she's great out of the gate. And then if you look at her campaign in 2020, it just fizzled out before there were ever any votes. And I've described it as the Jenga campaign. So that at first it's really easy, right? Then the pieces are fine, and as it gets tougher as you get higher up and you're pulling out this piece. And last Friday, she pulled out a piece on the economy that said, let's do price controls at grocery stores. And the thing sort of wobbled. And other Democrats that I've asked on air, are you for price controls at the grocery store? Like, oh, maybe we should have a conversation about that. But clearly they don't really want it and they don't want to talk about it. How do you think she will do if she does any interviews or even at a debate when the questions are actually about the number one issue people care about, and that is the economy?
So here's the thing: for the last 12 months, the Trump campaign had set up an argument that you can't, you're too old to run, Joe. You're too old to run, and that became the frame. And 1 out of 4 voters said both men are too old to run. We would like somebody else. The Democrats have given those people their answer that he's not running. So it was a hard bar for Joe Biden to beat in this equation. But back in 2020, Trump set up the argument that Joe Biden's terrible at debates, and the whole Republican apparatus, he's terrible at debates. And Joe Biden breathed and spoke for an hour and a half. It's like, wasn't a great debate, but the bar was so low, he exceeded expectations. This whole argument about her sitting down with a journalist, she's not going to start drooling, right? So she's going to be able to win this argument one day.
Republicans are really setting the bar really low.
Right? This is the summer movie season, right? We got a convention. You don't win the presidency in July. We got a convention here. You don't win the presidency in August. It's all going to happen in September and October when the people who will decide who the next president is aren't even aware that you and I are talking about politics today because they don't pay attention to this.
I remember, who was it? You? It was you on the podcast. The baseball season had just started.
Yeah.
And you said we are going to have the opening day of baseball.
Correct.
And the World Series will end before there's a vote. That was you.
Exactly.
And so right now we're in the middle of the season.
We're in 2/3 of the way through the season. We still have a third of baseball left and all of the playoffs. And then people will vote.
Do you see how much I pay attention to you?
That's pretty good.
No, I listen to you and I remember indeed. What, Michael, if anything, worries you as a Democrat right now about her chances of winning the presidency?
Oh, look. The last 8 elections in this country for president have been decided by 125,000 votes in a handful of states. That's still probably going to be true today. But it's always true. The Republicans start out with a natural electoral college advantage, just the way that we've move our votes around. But I think it's a terribly close race. It was not a terribly close race on the 4th of July. And so, back in the game here. And it really is, I believe a good staff, a good campaign gets you a point. And in a 1-point race, that's going to be what's happening. So the question is whether people go in this hall, all go home and bang on doors for 78 more days and pull people to the polls.
How much does it matter that the youth vote was very much unenthusiastic with Biden and now are very enthusiastic with Harris? And is that why we're seeing the poll numbers? Has that been the difference?
That has definitely been the difference because for up until July, brown and black voters under the age of 35, there was nothing Joe Biden could say to them. In fact, my friends who work in the advertising space, they're like, why are they buying any ads? I'm like, because they haven't figured out what to say to them. So, and whatever they're saying is not working. So why would they buy ads to do that? So focus on your general audience. But I think with Harris, the door opens up. I mean, so the polling that came out in Arizona, I mean, she's up 5 in Arizona. Right, he was down 3 in Arizona 4 weeks ago. Right, that's because there's young people that have something to be excited about. I mean, she's 59. She presents a lot younger than that. She does, and she's got that energy. Right, so it's really hard for him to knock her around saying that she doesn't bring any energy to the table.
I thought it was interesting. We showed this clip of Don Lemon. He went to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and he went around saying, "Who are you voting for? Who are you voting for?" And he even says he was like, "Wow," because most people are like Trump, like Black Americans, white Americans, brown Americans saying Trump. And he asked one of them, he says, well, why? And he goes, well, 4 years ago, my paycheck went a lot further. I was doing better. And Don Lemon says, but the actual economic numbers are better than that, and they are better. And the guy's like, just laughed in his face and says, who are you trying to kid? And it's interesting about numbers, like arguing that the fundamentals of the economy are sound. Remember John McCain tried that?
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
No.
You can't tell people how they're going to feel.
Well, and when it comes to economic issues, you look at it through your own prism, right? It's like, how am I doing? How much was my gas, right? If you live in California or if you live in Washington State, you're paying $5.50 a gallon. In Virginia, I got gas yesterday for $3.30. Okay, we're all in America. It's like 2.5 gallon difference, and for a lot of people, that 2.5 extra bucks is a big deal on their gas tank to get back and forth. You can't say, hey, you should feel better because inflation cost is half of what it was 12 months year over year. That's not how people look at their lives. They look at their lives like, how am I doing here? I'm working 3 jobs and I make X. I'm working 3 jobs and I make X minus 10. That's how they view their economic situation. So Harris is right to be leading with, hey, prices are still too high, right? And the trouble is, the federal government can do not a lot of things to affect the cost of a gallon of milk or a carton of eggs. Like, I mean, there are marginal things, and you can't make it happen tomorrow.
But saying that the grocery store owners are greedy and that's why they're gouging you just seems so weird and off base to me. And look, not just to me, to CNN, to the Washington Post editorial page, and other. I saw a mutual friend. I'll just use his first name, Bob, longtime Democrat from the South. I'm not outing him here.
Hi, Bob.
I said, Bob, you can't possibly be for price controls at the grocery store. And he said, oh, hell no. I'm an old school Democrat. I thought, okay, so there might be a divide. But I understand that the Democrats also probably believe, well, she's never actually going to control the grocery stores, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And you're in the silly season here where you get to make promises, and campaigns are famous for making promises that they're unable to keep at the end of the day. But at least she's talking about the things that people care about.
Yeah.
And it's like, the Republicans didn't even have a platform in the 2020 convention. It's like,
I know. That's
so,
funny. The
so
Democrats complained about that, like Republicans complaining about her not doing interviews.
Yeah. But my point is, like, and this election so far has been there's not been big policy proposals that have been put on the table. It's right now, it's been a personality change election.
I have 2 more questions in this segment. One is, why do you think the Senate Democrats, who are in the big states where there are should be tough races for them, they seem to be really holding their own?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of not necessarily Montana, though Tester's hanging in there.
Yeah.
But
it's in the margin.
Yeah, it's in the margins, right? And so I do still think that the Republicans will take the majority in the Senate because there's just so many options that they have, so many paths to that majority.
They just have to win one of the
but
contestants.
Not as many as maybe they should.
Yeah, well, I think like Senate races are different animals. I'm a creature of the Senate. Been working there since I got since I was in college. They're 6-year terms, and sometimes they can skip a national wave because it's like, well, I know Dana. She's down the street. Like, yeah, I might disagree with her, but she'll show up and have the argument with me. And people like a Tester, people like a Brown, get the benefit of the doubt, and that's why across the board, even before Biden got out, they were polling 2, 3, 4, 5 points ahead. But it wasn't a surprise to us that these people were going to have hard races. They're running in states that Trump had carried during, when they weren't last up, right? Because senators are only on with the presidential race every 12 years, right? They get to skip the middle cycle, so they're not a victim of the turnout that happens in a presidential year or beneficiary of. So that's why I think, and these were well financed. People were ready. People had, John Testa spent $50 million in Montana so far. I mean, you and I can own most of the media outlets in the state for $50 million. So, I mean, they've just been highly engaged campaigns for a longer period of time.
I see. The last thing I want to ask you about in this segment is about Jewish voters. I just spoke to one on America's Newsroom, and he said he's registered as a Democrat when he was 18. He has always voted for Democrats, but he is very upset about the policy of the Biden-Harris administration. He went to Trump's event at Bedminster last week, and he said he felt like Trump was speaking right to him on the issue he cares about the most.
Right.
And then you have this situation here where you have a lot of people whether the cause of the Palestinians is really their number one issue, or you have paid agitators and protesters causing havoc for Vice President Harris and Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, now her running mate. How do you think about what she might do or say this week to deal with what they're trying to do out there, which is to make a lot of chaos to get on the news?
Yeah. I mean, I've been to Israel. Family members are Israeli. I mean, they live in a different life than you and I live in, right?
Mhm.
They're surrounded by people who are
They're
sworn.
they're on seven. They're fighting on 7 fronts right now.
7 fronts, and they're less than the size of the state of Rhode Island. So,
Right.
like, you know, I remember being briefed by the military over there, and they're like, Michael, you don't understand. When a plane goes off in enemy territory, it takes 45 seconds, and now you're not in our country any longer. You're over the ocean, because that's how short of a time we have for an airstrike to see it come in and to our country. I get the primal needs. You gotta survive as a people. You gotta survive as your family, and you gotta live in this. Basically, you're in a war zone. So you pick your friends pretty hard. Who's going to be with me? You know, in the foxhole, and it's not an easy place to be. And this is why I hope Blinken's over there now. That and they think they're making progress. So if you can and you get to a ceasefire place, and you can begin to try to rebuild some things. But
politically, does it matter to her about this issue here?
It'd be
Could
much
she
better
lose
for
on
her.
this issue?
It'd be much better for her if there's a ceasefire. Absolutely, between now and election day, for sure.
Yeah.
Because you're arguing throw these guys out because look at what they've created. You can say, well, we've made progress on
But
the
if the
foreign policy.
ceasefire just keeps things status quo,
Well, ceasefire is better than more killing.
yeah, that's fair. Hopefully, but we have to get the hostages back.
Yes,
That's number one. Number one. All right, we'll be right back with more Perino on politics. And welcome back to Perino on Politics, Michael. This is the last segment. This is where I ask you that famous question: what am I missing? What are you paying attention to?
Wow. I know. I knew this was coming too, and I still don't have a good answer yet. I mean, look, I think that I'm looking forward to this debate. I think the debate will be
Decisive or informative.
I think it'll be informative. I mean, the thing is, Trump's had a lot of bad days. I can't keep counting on him having a lot more bad days. Like at some point, he's got to. I mean, he's bringing in his old guard that's trying to get him back on message. Like, I mean, he has the benefit, although on the economic stuff, Harris's deficit to Trump is half of what Biden was in 4 weeks.
Just because she's not him.
It's just not him, right?
What's interesting, because actually it's in the title, Biden-Harris administration, that she has figured out a way so far to be like, oh yeah, I didn't have anything to do with that. Yeah,
and I think, like most Americans, I don't think the vice president has a lot of job responsibility. Nope. So it's a harder, hog to tie, to say that's the case. And she gets everybody knows it was an arranged marriage. All these, vice presidents are always in an arranged marriage. So it's like, well, in the end, here's what I think about this, right? And look, if I was on the other side, I'd be throwing those rocks too. Like, oh, this is what she said in 19. This is what she said. Yeah. But, J.D. Vance did not say some very nice things about Donald Trump for 3 years, all on video. And now he's running with him. So like, if everybody gets to say, hey, maybe I've learned something or two, or I've changed my mind for the following reasons, tell me why you changed mine then.
Mm-hmm. So the debate. So do you think there should be more than one debate, or will there be more than one debate?
I know it's so. Donald Trump doesn't debate a single Republican during the primary season, and then he gets to call out that the Democrats don't do enough debates. But it's just sort of a moving target. I mean, I think it's a good moment. I think it's a moment of national clarity. I think when people will stop and look in, and 95% of people already know who they're voting for today.
Right.
So it's the last 5.
And that momentum coming out of the debate. We haven't mentioned RFK Jr.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting is this past week, I talked to a friend who said that when they're looking at a lot of the Senate Republican races, anywhere that RFK Jr. has a significant presence or is on the ballot, he is taking votes away from Trump.
Right.
And from that other Republican. So making it difficult for them to lock down those races.
Yes. Because 6 months ago, he was the safe place for the double haters, they call them, people who don't like either guy, wishes somebody else would run. So he was getting 17.
I call them the double disappointed.
Double disappointed. Double deep.
I don't think they're hated.
Double
haters.
Double deeply disappointed. Right?
Yes. Deeply disappointed.
And RFK was holding that, and then lo and behold, you take one of the older guys off the ticket. They're like, well, you know, I don't want to vote for Republicans, so I'll vote for RFK, or the vice versa. I don't want to vote for Democrats, so I'll vote for RFK. You know, and the more you learn about him, like, you know, the less you might think he's like you. But he's like, it's almost all, half of his vote has now gone to Harris, of those who say that they're going to vote. But I mean, he's down to like 5 now. Although he was job shopping with both potential administrations.
Wasn't that interesting?
That was quite something.
I know.
Yes.
And then he put out a statement and says, "Oh, I am not."
Absolutely.
It's kind of hard to believe that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe.
And his
that.
people are not very good about getting back. We've asked for interviews. It's just like, I want to interview Nicole Shanahan. He said she was the most qualified person in America to be the vice president.
Ooh. Let's call her up.
Yeah. All right, Michael. So where will you watch Kamala Harris's speech?
Home. Where the rest of America is. and I've been at 10 conventions, and I would always watch it on TV, not in the hall.
I worked for a congressman years and years ago, the late Dan Schaefer, and he always left Washington, D.C. to go to Virginia, the suburbs where he lived, to watch the State of the Union address.
Yeah.
And I think it was because he liked to kick back and watch it and also have a drink.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was a young press aide, when I worked for senators, I would not have them be in the hall either. We would go home and watch it at a high school civics class.
Oh, that's cool.
And watch it in real time, and then
like Tim Walz.
Talk to by the way, well, because all my people wouldn't get television, but if you're the only elected official at home, the TV cameras would come to you to get reaction. So it was a way to cobble up some press and be hanging out with kids.
I have a new assistant. Her name is Kate DePietro. Her first day on the job was the night of the debate from Trump Biden, and it's been a wild month, right?
She's worked here for 10 years now.
But it is just so interesting as we're on our way here, and I was trying to remember something I was going to say, and I said, I believe. And I couldn't remember what I was going to say. And I said that children are our future. And then she just looked at me in this weird way. She goes, with the children? I'm like, wait, you don't know Whitney Houston? No?
Nope.
And she said, no. So I had to pull it up on the old YouTube.
Unless her grandmother played for her.
And I was like, I'm losing out on a lot of these references.
Totally.
But you and I, we can always hang.
We still have each other.
You and I can always hang. Thank you, Michael Meehan. I appreciate it.
So great to be here.